Hi everyone, welcome to Domain 4, Module 19.1 to 19.2. We are talking about social thinking and social influence. Here are your learning objectives and here are your vocab. Pause where you need to. So let's start with what is social psychology. So this is a branch of psychology that focuses on interpersonal relationships and their impact on our behavior, our thoughts, and how we relate to other people. So when we look at explaining behaviors, we look at something called an attributional style. This is the way that we explain behavior. So there are two ways that we can explain behavior. The first is dispositional. This is when we focus on someone's personality or temperament. So something that is a characteristic of the person. For example, if we say that Billy doesn't do his homework because Billy is lazy, that would be a trait that we are connecting to Billy. And it's something that is stable and unchanging. Whereas the other way of attributing behavior is called situational. And with situational, we focus on the set of circumstances that influence behavior. For example, Billy has been overwhelmed lately, he hasn't gotten enough sleep, and he was unable to complete the homework on time due to those circumstances. That would be a situational attributional style. So this is just the attributional theory, like looking at it and explaining behavior either by a dispositional style or a situational style. And in this, there is something called the fundamental attribution error. So this is our tendency to attribute, so to explain the behavior of others to internal dispositional rather than situational. So meaning when we're not looking at ourselves, but when we're looking at other people, we tend to look at their behaviors and explain them through, well, that's just the way they are. It is their disposition. They are lazy, or they are uncaring, or they are mean. But if it is our behavior, we tend to go the other way. We tend to say situational. Well, I said that mean thing because X, Y, and Z happened. So we tend to look at other people and judge their character. So when we look at our own behavior, we have what's called a self-serving bias. And this is our eagerness to perceive ourselves favorably. So we have a situational attributional style for ourselves. Now, this is in a way self-preserving. It's helping our self-esteem. If something bad happens, if we fail a test, it is situational. Like, I didn't get a lot of sleep, I've been overwhelmed, the teacher didn't teach me that very well, I missed class, whatever. But sometimes this can hinder our progress because it can hide realities that we need to really look at in order to make progress or to do better. So there's a bunch of examples here in these images. You can stop and look at them. So what are the factors that affect our attributional style? So there's a lot of factors, and we'll talk about these more in class, but here's just some examples. So the narratives that we have been told about others, especially those that are in some way an outgroup to us, meaning we don't identify in similar ways to them, we might be more likely to explain them in dispositional ways. Social scientists, so psychologists, sociologists, we tend to blame present and past situations and not disposition. Another factor is culture. Culture has a huge influence, and culture could mean your country that you've grown up in, the family culture, the political, there's, the educational culture. There's so many different rings to that. For example, people raised in Western cultures tend to make attributions more based on dispositions. So they are more likely to commit the fundamental attribution error, meaning overly prescribing things to dispositional, where in Asian cultures, they are less likely to commit that error because they're more likely to look at the situation and give situational attributional style to explaining behavior. So what about our attitudes? How do our attitudes affect our actions and behaviors? So an attitude is a belief and feeling that predisposes us to respond in a particular way to an object, a person, or an event. Studies show that attitudes and behaviors do not always match. Some studies show that we do talk the talk and walk the talk, but so some studies show this, some studies show the opposite. So what is it? Well, it depends on the case that we're looking at. So if there are outside influences on what we do that are very minimal, then we can talk the talk and walk the walk. If we are keenly aware, like focused in on our attitudes and connecting that to our behavior, we're going to be more likely to follow through with our beliefs into our actions. So another influence on our actions is something called foot in the door phenomenon. So this would be handy, if you just wanted to ask someone for a favor, you were interested in marketing or business or any sort of sales. Foot in the door phenomenon is a basic concept in all of those categories. So foot in the door phenomenon is the tendency for people who have first agreed to a small request to comply later with a larger request. So for example, you start out small. You say, Mom, can I have $5 so that I can get a coffee? And then you say, Mom, okay, she gives you the $5. You say, can I have another $10 because while I'm out, I can grab some lunch. And, you can kind of escalate it. And then you can go with the final ask and say, Mom, can I take the car out tonight because blah, blah, blah. So you start with a smaller thing and you can gradually increase it. So it's the idea of, think of like an old school, like door-to-door salesman. If they can or someone who might call you and try to get you to buy something, or a car salesman who you walk in the door, they are like, here you go. Would you like some free coffee? Would you like to go for a test drive? They come to your door or whatever, and they have like a product. Would you like to just see how it works? If they can get their foot in the door, if they can get you to agree to really small, they don't really ask a lot of you tasks, then you can do bigger asks later, and the people are more likely to say yes. There's also something called door in the face technique, which is the opposite, where you ask for like a huge ask. The person you expect is going to say no. And then you say, well, can we do at least this? So think of like asking your parents for a big thing. Can I have no curfew tonight? And they say no, like that, assume that was a big ask. And then you say, okay, well, can I stay out an hour later? So that would be door in the face method. So role playing also plays a factor in our actions. So if we are assigned a role, a set of expectations in a social setting that define how we ought to behave, for example, you as a student at a school, in a particular school, might have different expectations for that role, or me as a teacher in a school. So I now have a certain specific guideline of how a teacher should act, and now I have to start playing out or role playing that role. So, when you first started high school, you might have felt like you were just playing high school, like you were just kind of acting like you belonged, and then eventually you felt like a high schooler. When you go to college, it might feel like you are, kind of just acting like a college student and trying to walk the walk, but eventually you will feel like a college student. Philip Zimbardo has the most famous social psych experiment on this called the Stanford Prison Experiment. He conducted it in 1971 on college students in his Stanford University in the basement of one of the buildings. And he randomly assigned students to either be prison guards or prisoners in a simulated prison. They knew that they were just playing a role. However, he had to end this experiment very early, after only 6 days, because they began to become the characters that they were playing. The guards became overly aggressive and demeaning, and prisoners felt a sense of helplessness and mental distress. So they had to end it early. So this is showing you the power of a role and the power of a situation and how those things can influence how we act. Why good people can do bad things, or people can rise to the occasion and do heroic things depending on the roles and the expectations that they feel they are playing. Cognitive dissonance is a fascinating term. So this is when we act in a way to reduce a discomfort, when we have a thought that doesn't match with our behavior. So when we have a thought that doesn't match with our behavior, we do something to reduce this discomfort. For example, we might say that lying is wrong. That's a thought that we have. However, someone can point out a time that you lied. And that is discomforting to us as human beings. And so we look for ways to justify our behavior, or we alter our thought about it. So we basically kind of rationalize so that we feel more comfortable with the fact that our thoughts, our beliefs, don't match with our actions. We'll show a bunch of examples in class, but you can obviously look at politics on both sides of the spectrum. You can look at religion, you can look at education, anywhere people hold strong core beliefs, but then find an area where their actions don't match those beliefs. So when we are called out on cognitive dissonance, it is very uncomfortable. And like I said, we will do whatever we can to correct that in any way that we can so that we feel better. So that could be one of these three things. It could be we change our belief. Okay, now we feel less dissonant because, okay, I guess lying is okay sometimes. Now I feel better. Or we change our action. Okay, you know what? I'm going to start telling the truth. Or we change our perception of that action. So we justify it in some way. So our takeaways, attributions, remember, are the explanation as to why someone does something. Self-serving bias is when we focus on situational attributions for ourselves. We see ourselves in a more positive light. Westerners are more susceptible to fundamental attribution error. Foot in the door is that small request that leads to a bigger one. And cognitive dissonance is when your core beliefs don't align with your actions and you do something to reduce that uncomfy feeling. All right, so that wraps up Mod 19.1 to 19.2, and I will see you in class.